Welcome to my channel. Today, we are going deep into one of the most heartbreaking, powerful, and unforgettable chapters of French history: the immense losses France suffered during the war. This is not just about battles and dates. This is about people, about families, about a nation that endured unimaginable pain yet refused to lose its soul. When the world was burning, when cities collapsed, when generations disappeared into the trenches, France stood as a symbol of courage, dignity, and sacrifice. And today, we honor that sacrifice by remembering what happened, how it happened, and how it shaped the France we know today. When war arrived at France's doorstep, the country was not just entering a conflict, it was entering a storm that would swallow millions of lives, destroy entire landscapes, and change the identity of the nation forever. From the burning fields of the north to the ruined villages of the east, from the cries of soldiers in the trenches to the silent tears of mothers waiting at home, the war carved scars into every corner of French life. The losses were not counted only in numbers. They were counted in broken dreams, unfinished stories, empty seats at dinner tables, and generations that never came home again. The very first and most devastating loss France suffered during the war was the loss of life, a scale beyond imagination. More than 1 million French soldiers were killed in combat, and another 4 million were wounded. Almost every family in France lost someone: a father, a son, a brother, a friend. Young men who once dreamed of building futures were suddenly thrown into a world of mud, artillery, and endless fear. Entire classes of students vanished. Whole villages were left with no surviving men at all. In some towns, after the war, the silence was so deep that it felt like the entire community had disappeared. The grief was overwhelming, and the emotional wounds remained even decades later. France did not just lose soldiers, it lost a generation. But the losses on the battlefield were only the beginning. France also suffered massive territorial destruction, especially in regions like Nord, Somme, Meuse, and Marne. Beautiful farmlands were turned into craters of mud and metal. Forests were shredded down to stumps by artillery shells. Rivers ran black with debris. Entire towns like Verdun and Ypres were reduced to rubble. Villages that had stood for centuries vanished under fire. The famous phrase, zones, ruches, the red zones, was created for areas so heavily destroyed by explosives, chemicals, and corpses that they were declared uninhabitable. Some of these zones still cannot be lived in today, even after more than a century. The land itself was wounded. Industry and infrastructure suffered enormous damage as well. Factories were bombed, bridges were destroyed, and train lines were cut. Mines collapsed, roads were ripped open. France's industrial heart's ability to produce steel, coal, weapons, and machinery was shattered. And with those losses came economic disaster. After the war, France was drowning in debt, struggling to rebuild cities, transport systems, and businesses that had been wiped out. Inflation soared. Families that had already lost sons in the war now faced poverty, hunger, and unemployment. The emotional pain turned into economic pain, creating a new wave of suffering across the country. But the loss was not only material, it was cultural. Many of France's historic monuments, cathedrals, and artistic treasures were damaged or destroyed. The famous Cathedral of Reims, a symbol of French identity and royal heritage, was bombarded and burned for days. Libraries filled with ancient manuscripts were lost. Museums were threatened. Artworks were stolen, damaged, or evacuated. The war did not only kill people, it tried to erase memory, history, and identity. Yet, even in destruction, the French spirit fought to preserve what made France unique. Another silent but devastating loss was psychological trauma. For soldiers, the war did not end when they left the trenches. Many returned home broken, haunted by what they had seen. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, affected hundreds of thousands of veterans. Nightmares, tremors, depression, and emotional numbness became part of everyday life for many survivors. Families could not understand how their sons, who left home smiling, came back unable to speak or sleep. These were wounds that medicine could not heal, scars that stayed hidden but deep. Women in France also suffered in ways that history often forgets. While the men fought at the front, women became the backbone of the nation. They worked in factories, farms, offices, and hospitals. They kept families alive. They faced hunger, shortages, uncertainty, and constant fear. Many women became widows before the age of 25. Many never married at all because the men they might have loved were killed. Their sacrifice is a chapter of the war that deserves as much respect as any battle. Children, too, paid a heavy price. Many lost their fathers. Many grew up in refugee camps after their towns were destroyed. Many saw things no child should ever see: bombings, evacuations, and death. Schools were destroyed. Teachers were killed. Homes were gone. An entire generation grew up surrounded by trauma, learning to rebuild life from ruins. In the French countryside, farmers suffered tremendously. The war destroyed fields, livestock, barns, and crops. Land that once fed families and markets became battlegrounds covered in barbed wire and unexploded shells. Even after the war, farmers risked their lives every time they plowed their land because buried ammunition still exploded unexpectedly. To this day, farmers in northeastern France still find old shells, grenades, and weapons in their soil. The earth remembers everything. France also endured political loss. The unity of the nation was shaken by disagreements, fear, and exhaustion. Leaders struggled to find solutions, and the country was divided between those who demanded peace and those who wanted victory at any cost. After the war, political tensions grew even stronger, eventually leading to new crises in the decades that followed. The psychological and political instability created what many historians call a wounded republic, a nation trying to heal but never fully succeeding. The economy plunged into chaos. France spent billions on the war effort, money it did not have. Loans from allies helped the country survive but created long-term dependency and debt. Factories had to be rebuilt from scratch, farms restored, houses reconstructed. Millions of soldiers needed medical care, pensions, or housing. Unemployment rose, wages fell, and the cost of living skyrocketed. The French people were exhausted physically, emotionally, and financially, and yet, despite all this loss, France refused to break. The country rose again from ashes, rebuilt its cities, regrew its forests, restored its monuments, and honored its dead. The French people turned their pain into determination. The ruins became symbols not of defeat but of resistance. The cemeteries filled with white crosses became sacred grounds that remind every visitor that peace is never free, that freedom has a price written in the lives of those who never returned. The losses France suffered during the war cannot be measured fully. They live in the silence of old trenches, the broken stones of ruined churches, the names engraved on monuments in every village, and the memories passed down through families. France lost millions of lives, billions in wealth, priceless culture, and uncountable dreams. But what France did not lose was its identity, its courage, or its heart. That is the true strength of the French nation. Even today, when you walk through the battlefields of Verdun or the Somme, you can feel the weight of history in the air. You can feel the stories of young soldiers who stood in the mud, holding the line for their country. You can feel the sorrow of mothers who waited for letters that never came. You can feel the determination of a nation that said, even in its darkest hour, we will not surrender. France's losses were immense, but its resilience was even greater. This story is not just about the past. It is a reminder to the world that war does not end on the day the guns fall silent. War leaves echoes in the land, in the people, in the generations that follow. France's losses during the war are a lesson in courage and a warning about the true cost of conflict. And by remembering these losses, we honor those who sacrificed everything so that future generations could live in peace. Thank you for watching this emotional journey through one of the darkest but most defining chapters of France's history. If you felt connected to this story, if you honor the memory of those who suffered and sacrificed, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video so more people around the world can learn about the history and resilience of France. Your support helps keep these stories alive.